the Epileptic Explorer, and today we will begin our reading in Last Days, written by Adam Nevill. He has another book that he's written, and that book is, as I go back and check, it's right now a Netflix series on obviously Netflix. And hang on one second. Hair. And I'm looking forward to reading his book. Maybe we'll get to that book that he has written on Netflix. But in the meantime, we'll go ahead and read this book written by Adam Nevill called Last Days. And yes, I got this at Barnes & Noble. Alright, the prologue. Denver, March 3rd, 2011. And the woman could hear those old friends moving in the distant and not so distant rooms of her home. Old friends she tried to forget for longer than she had the strength to remember, until she understood her life had been one long wait for them to show up and commence with whatever business they were so eager to finish. Because the old friends never forgot, they arrived without invitation and appeared with little warning. They visited after dark, and they never let go. Of late, the old friends were bolder and stronger, more skilled at getting inside, at passing over. Tonight, their movements suggested the visit was conclusive, the end game to an incremental reunion. Closing her eyes, the woman sighed and supported her weight with one hand against the doorframe, then looked up, her body rigid with enough determination to take one step inside the house. Then another, and another after that. Stood at the foot of the stairs in her unlit house, still wearing her coat and shoes. She looked up and into the darkness concealing the top of the stairs, and listened with all the straining concentration the ears of the frightened can command. But she also listened with the resignation of the weary. Only the thinnest peripheral glow from the closest street lamp provided any light, and that never penetrated far inside the hallway before the open front door. In the distance, a car accelerated, and she wished she were inside it. She turned her head and looked at the deserted street, and she gripped with a powerful urge to run from somewhere where the lights would still be on, and where the faces of people would be engaged in their smiles or their talk, or just their silence. She wanted to be with them, and part of their unexceptional lives so much it hurt. She tensed in anticipation of her unusual flight taking hold. Moved one foot towards the open door, but not the other. She stood still, stood her ground, because she was as cursed as a ghost on the last day of its occupation. A wraith with little to haunt besides the empty rooms of an unpeopled existence. A shade watching the world from another place, half in this world and half in another, listening to the sound of all the bright, clear voices, but never offering up her own. She'd fought harder than the rest. She had endured when others had gone under. Into her, into, into her came a sudden invasion of regret, and its attendant hopelessness. Living with the consequences of actions committed before reason and experience had much say in anything felt familiar enough to be tedious. No matter how many times she revisited the past and added presumptions and extracted details, it remained unmovable and always promised to deliver her right to where she currently stood, alone. She reckoned she was about ready for that time. She swallowed and removed the cold weight of the 38 millimeter from her handbag. And to think she was one of the lucky ones. This was the third house the woman had rented in the past 5 months, under a false name, and she had lost her deposit on each property because of the walls and the signs the old friends had put upon them. 3 days back, she came downstairs from her bedroom to a cold house without power. Scents of bad water and the ashes of a fire soaked by overnight rain had seeped up the basement stairs into the hallway. She'd found wires chewed through under the fuse box in the basement, and the wall behind the damaged cables was strained by unidentifiable matter, mostly dry, which she covered with black paint. Kept her eyes closed and cried at the same time as she lashed the wall with the brush. With an unwelcome frequency, they had also begun to leave things behind, to introduce inevitability to a daunting reacquaintance. Yesterday, before she wrote a long email to her son in Toronto, writing as if it were the last communication she would ever make, she found a little blackened shoe on the kitchen floor, small enough for a child, hard as wood, stitched like a buckskin moccasin, and old. So very old. Dropped from a foot she dare not even consider. A puff of soot had fallen from it when she scooped it up with a pizza menu to drop in the trash. And here we are, girl. Bump, 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 bump. Frantic now in at least one room upstairs. Probably her bedroom. The woman recalled a party above the thin ceiling of a motel room she'd once rented in LA. A long time ago. On the run, even then. Those muffled thumps of feet and sudden shrieks and bursts of laughter from strangers that served no greater purpose than a reminder of her disengagement from life. While keeping her awake, excuse me. But up there, in this house, her final refuge, wasn't any kind of party she wanted to attend. They were in her room for sure, because the determined bumps, swaddled by bedclothes, had become crashes as something on her bed started to cast about. A bedside table was swept of its contents. The woman pulled her dry tongue from the roof of her mouth to swallow the lump in her throat. She knuckled a fist against the wall until the dizziness passed, then turned around and closed the front door. Shut herself inside with them. Another of her uninvited visitors attempted to raise itself from the floor of the kitchen. She could hear it behind the closed door at the end of the hall. A disturbance she'd heard in the last two apartments she'd rented right before she fled them in the middle of the night. Sounds that brought to her mind the image of a wildebeest calf she had once seen on television, with a broken leg by the jaws of a crocodile, jerky in its attempt to pull itself away from the water. When she wondered if they would come for her on all fours or upright, she raised the pistol and went and stood at the foot of the stairs, supported her lead hand with the other like she'd learned on the gun range, but with the barrel pointed up, ready. The woman stilled her mind and let her final thoughts find a memory of her boy. On the night she carried him through the cold desert, pressed into her chest. So long ago. But she remembered her snuffles, his warmth. A little hand clasped in her raven hair like it was yesterday. Went all the way down to her waist in those days, and covered her baby like a waterfall. That boy always knew what his mama was too. Didn't matter what they did to make it not so. Make no mistake. He always knew. And she got her boy out. She smiled through her tears, sucked her breath inside. Come on, man, she screamed at the thing that moved into partially visibility. In a murky articulation of painful movements, onto the top step. Darkness folded about the stairs. They brought it with them from the lightless place between here and somewhere else. And within its protective veil, the intruder obeyed her request and came down to her on all fours. the face upturned. Before it covered the short distance between them, the woman shoved the cold barrel of the handgun inside her own mouth. When it felt like it was somewhere behind her eyes, she squeezed the trigger. That is the end of, what do we call this one? The prologue. And now we begin the first chapter. Ooh. But yeah, quite a first chapter. Well, not quite a chapter, but quite an introduction to the book here. Do we have anything? Nothing yet. I hope you guys are liking this this video. It's the first time we're in this book. This is our first video in this book. It's so far pretty interesting. So I'm curious what's going on inside that house. Yeah, I'm very curious to see what's going on. I wonder, like who that person was and why they were all on all fours. Yeah, it's interesting. So let me see, how long is this next chapter? Because that wasn't very. Yeah, the introduction was. Sorry, the prologue was not very long. Let's see. Oh, I think I saw. Did I? Yeah. Okay. Well. Yeah, some of you, I'm sure, are wondering, like, what is this book about? Well, let me read the back to you and see what you guys think. When guerrilla documentary maker Kyle Freeman is asked to shoot a film on the notorious cult known as the Temple of the Last Days, it appeared his prayers had been answered. The cult became a worldwide phenomenon in 1975 when there was a massacre including the death of its infamous leader, Sister Catherine. Kyle's brief is to explore the paranormal myths surrounding an organization that became a testament to paranoia, murderous rage, and occult rituals. The shoot's locations take off to the cult's first temple in London, an abandoned farm in France, and a derelict copper mine in the Arizonan desert where the Temple of the Last Days met its bloody end. But when he interviews those involved in the case, those who haven't broken silence in decades, a series of uncanny events plague the shoots. Troubling out-of-body experiences, nocturnal visitations, the sudden demise of their interviewees, and the discovery of a ghastly artifact make Kyle question what exactly it is the cult has awoken, as well as its interest in him. So it could be a it could have been a nocturnal visitation from possibly a creature. So I'm getting curious as to what that creature is. And yeah, we have the first chapter coming up, so we'll go ahead and start that chapter. Bloomsbury, London, May 30th, 2011. Have you ever heard of Sister Catherine and the Temple of the Last Days? The smile vanished from Maximilian Solomon's eyes when he asked the question, a sign of self-seriousness or a sudden scrutiny of Kyle's fitness for disclosure. Something Kyle noticed about mind, body, and spirit types who spoke about their interests with strangers. Ufologists and mediums were the same, but even through Solomon's eyes hardened. The small tanned face of the CEO of Revelation Productions retained its default setting of being vaguely amused, with Kyle, or maybe with everyone in the world except himself. The permanent half-smile was either convivial or mocking. It was hard to tell which with these people. The successful, the owners of things, the commissioners and controllers he dealt with as a filmmaker. Yes, Kyle said, and then his mind snatched at what he did know about Sister Catherine and the Temple of the Last Days. Fragments resembling instamatic Polaroid photos, some bleached flashes of a scruffy, bearded man in handcuffs, walking from a police car and into a municipal building. Uh, aerial footage of what might have been a ranch or a farm in California. Snippets of imagery from something about the cult he'd seen on telly a long time ago. A documentary, or was it news footage? He wasn't sure of the source of the impressions, but they were glimpses of things that suggested a notoriety that had evolved into the noir and the cultish. He knew that much. The group was perceived these days as dangerous and cool. A U.S. indie band called itself Sister Catherine in the 80s. Some industrial band called itself the Temple of the Last Days in the next decade. And of course, he'd recognize the iconic portrait of Sister Catherine anywhere without knowing much about her life. It had been Andy Warholed onto t-shirts in Camden Market, alongside images of Jim Jones and Charles Manson, Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees. A plump, heavily made-up face, its expression beatific, haloed by a purple nun's habit as her eyes search the heavens. Mother Mary meets Revlon, an evil female cult leader reduced to sick joke gimmickry, lurid nostalgia, and bespoke infamy for disaffected youth. A woman who was killed by, or did she commit suicide with her followers in America? He couldn't remember, but he knew the temple had murdered people. Or was it each other? A film star? No, that was Manson's family. Same era because the temple was a hippie death cult in the 60s. Or was it the 70s? The cult, he said, and tried not to look clueless. Too late. His eyes had gone vague, and he'd frowned with confusion throughout his hazy recall. Max seemed pleased with his ignorance. It would enable him to expound. An organization that began right here in London in 1967. London? Yes, in this city. Few are aware of that, but Sister Catherine was British. Her real name was Hermione Tyrrell. She was born in Kent, came from the remnants of a wealthy family. Her mother had a title. She was a baroness, and made sure little Catherine knew she was better than everyone, as did the boarding schools where she was educated until she was 14, when her father left his bankrupt family. And little Kathy and her mother were forced into the ignominy of poverty. She came down hard from a pile in the country to a council flat in Margate. Had to slum it in a second-hand school uniform, down there with the rest of them. Must have been devastating for her, this plump little overachiever with funny teeth, while she watched her former peers become debutants. Kyle shrugged. I don't know much. She was a runaway at 15 and never spoke to her mother again. There was so much time in Borstal for theft and assault. Then prison in her 20s. Then she was arrested for solicitation and then again for running a brothel. Embezzlement, forgery too. A petty criminal. We can read what we choose into this, but what we do know from the few that have ever gone on record about her formative years is that Catherine never liked a level playing field. That's for sure. But she liked power and status, wanted back what had been taken from her. Kyle intuited a taint of bitterness in Max, but something else too. A grudging respect. But the temple's origins are fascinating. It grew out of a cocktail of Scientology and apocalyptic millennial ideas, a mimicry of Christian sainthood, occult magic, Buddhism, a belief in reincarnation, and various other things. Max seemed too detached himself from Kyle then, and from the conversation and even the room, like an old man reminiscing fondly. It could have been so beautiful. Simple psychotherapy techniques blended with medieval ideas of asceticism and piety, a life free of ego. These were the original values, all cloaked in mysticism for an aesthetic appeal. Breaking his reverie and now self conscious about his digression, Max killed the half smile. A well intentioned concept quickly usurped by a female psychopath and criminal elements. In London, it was known as the Last Gathering. It became the Temple of the Last Days in France during a schism in 1969. At a farm in Normandy, where they nearly starved to death, the remnants migrated to America under the same management, where they self-destructed in Arizona in 1975. That will surely be familiar. That you'll be surely familiar with. Kyle swallowed. I'm not that familiar with it. He cleared his throat too aggressively. With them. So I see, Max said with a condescending inflection on the last two words. Momentarily, Kyle felt dizzy with embarrassment, as if he were being asked a question at school that he had no answer for. An illogical reaction, because they would because why would he know anything about them? Had he pretended to? They were hardly important, and Max Solomon had invited him by email to the production offices of Bloomsbury for a meeting about a prospective collaboration, without stating anything specific about the proposal. He felt his face go hot. No disrespect intended, but why would I be? From what from what I've enjoyed about your work, Kyle, I'd say you might want to be. Max smiled, and commenced issuing the impression that he would ever be unruffled and idly comfortable man, his success innate, entitled to prosperity, and that all should know it. Signs recognizable to Kyle, and he instinctively disliked those who exhibited them. A class unto themselves, the money man, the film executive from the upper corporate tier, the self-important producer, loved being close to the creative flame, stressed their own creativity at every opportunity, and by doing so devalued the very word to house dust. But their aspiration to take ownership of another's work, he learned the hard way, was always reinforced by an underhand cleverness that you underestimated at your peril in this racket. They were, they were the reason he had reduced himself to self-financed filmmaking, and a personal debt so colossal just thinking about it made it hard to breathe. Earlier, he'd been collected from an impressive reception so brightly lit he'd spent the entire wait squinting. When shown into the CEO's office and Max had risen to greet him, his movements so light and graceful, the tiny man had reminded Kyle, uncomfortably and unkindly, of a small, clever monkey with quick, glittering eyes, a primate rising to its hind legs, dressed in Paul Smith. The man was also tanned with color of a with tanned sorry. The man was also tanned the color of a sweet potato, and in his entire scalp was covered in a semi-transparent pelt of hair implants. He never understood why balding men paid so dearly for a procedure that only gave them thinning hair. The one time he'd been to Canes, and the two visits he'd made to LA to talk to film agents, he'd found alien worlds full of men just like Max Solomon. When the email arrived the night before the request the meeting, Kyle had broken an anxious evening of reading job ads online and immediately checked out the Revelation production website. Instantly, his heart and its vain hope that the meeting might lead to an opportunity to work again, and that he would earn enough money to stave off his impending insolvency, cooled with dismay. His disappointment grew incrementally the more he saw of the website, until it was total. Revelation had published a book called The Message, which had sold 50 million copies, a strip line, a strip line that filled most of the company's homepage. He'd seen the book around. It had changed the life of many female celebrities as well as being one of those books that every other woman had been reading on the London Underground for one summer. How long ago that summer was escaped him, but he'd never seen the book being read in public since, as well as the message. The company produced a massive backlist of books, DVDs, CDs, and merchandise that had a contemporary life affirming, self help USP attached. The company claimed that the producers were groundbreaking and definitive and revelatory, but the brand struck Kyle as being very Californian, a bit vulgar and dated low tech, magic bullet chicanery, blah, while also fortifying his aversion to bad science blended with um, spiritual trash. There we go. But it had come to this, with the exception of porn. He dropped to the bottom of the film industry. His documentary about the American metalcore scene, Shredding, had been shown dozens of times on cable television, been a hit at festivals in 2006, and was still referred to as a cult classic in the music press. His film about witchcraft at a Scottish university, Coven, had got him into trouble for defamation, but it was also a film once shown on BBC Two to considerable acclaim. 30,000 people had bought the DVD of his film about the European black metal scene. Let's see how we're going to say this. Reigning in Hades. And 200,000 people had downloaded his documentary, Blood Frenzy, about three missing British hikers who vanished in the Arctic Circle. All of this success was real. No trash. He talked the walk. Sorry, he walked the walk. He had a real and inviolable filmography. But the distributors for the first three films claimed he owed them money. 15 grand. And he still carried another 10 grand's worth of production debt from Coven like an anvil upon his increasingly rounded shoulders. In total, his last self-financed film, An Unpaid Rent, had left him £30,000 in debt on a variety of credit cards and loans. A day of physical reckoning was nigh. Its anticipation made him incapable of a single undisturbed moment of happiness. It had also stolen his ability to relax, which seemed more hideous than losing the ephemera of joy. Something, he noted, guaranteed by the likes of Revelation Productions. Happiness, they promised that in spades. So maybe he should hold out for a DVD on tantric sex. What makes you think I'd be interested in a cult? I've seen your work. It has a refreshing openness. When dealing with the niche, the derided, the forgotten, and the unexplained, you're not an exploiter, Kyle. I like that. Or a sensationalist. You have an open mind, my friend, so I began to wonder if we could work together. I have become very curious about your approach, your vision. Kyle resisted any show of being flattered, though he was. I make films with one agenda: to capture the subculture culture and understand it, or to tell a story honestly, as those who speak to me perceived the experience. I've only made films about things that interest me, stories that fascinate me, that either no one has told or told well enough, stuff the mainstream media avoids or just misunderstands. And I won't compromise what I think is the right approach to achieving this. If I can bypass the current Hollywood and film industry business model in the process, it's a massive bonus. Artistic compromise, idea theft, getting turned over by suits. Enough already. I'm done with all that. He said this as a veiled warning. He'd been told it was unwise to show his bitterness in meetings with producers, that it was unprofessional. These days, he chose to ignore advice like that. Max raised his trimmed eyebrows as high as he could, but the lower half of his face didn't budge. He had a facelift. He had a facelift as well. The half smile was starting to convince him it was, in fact, mocking. Kyle tried to smother his rising irritation, but it was like trying to get the wrong size lid on a tin of red paint. His voice came out all right. Sorry, all tight. And my time is coming for filmmakers like me. He felt silly saying it, but was also reveling in how the film industry quaked at what digital technology was doing to their age-old monopoly. The least he could do was remind its representatives of this fact. Eventually, I intend to be the media provider for my own work, for a specific audience. And it will never be any dumbed down, censored junk put out by executive know nothings with their profit and loss sheets, their bottom lines, and their careers. I already finance, shoot, and edit the films myself. Owning distribution is the next battle. That's where I stand. I see. Max looked at his tiny feminine figures, spread them on his desk, studied his nails for a few seconds, while either frowning or fighting the half smile. It was hard to tell with someone whose chin was probably once part of their forehead. Your film, Blood Frenzy, struck me as unequivocal in its acceptance of, shall we say, a paranormal aspect to that tragic story. What I took from the film was a strong suggestion that something very old, something that defied natural law, had been responsible for the disappearance of a significant number of people in a distant part of the world. Did you come to believe that? Here we go. We all want the truth, Max. I just tried to understand what happened. There's no way I will ever know what really happened up there. I don't think anyone ever will. But I got an authentic sense of the place. The story came out of sorry, sense of the place the story came out of. People suggested things without much prompting. I never tried to steer the interviews or to emboss a theory on anything. My mind and my lens were wide open. The viewer is the interpreter. These days, everyone wants a say. The world is a hanging jury. I gave the audience the known facts and the fallible testimony of the interviewees. And to be honest, I had no idea what that film was going to suggest to me as I made it. I see. Interesting. But did he see? While Kyle spoke, Max had been frowning as if he was not listening, but thinking instead of what he was going to say next. It annoyed him even more, if that were possible. I don't like polemic, Mr. Solomon. Most audiences don't either. My trick is to choose a story that is so interesting, the audience has to get involved on some level. It's the most I can do as a director. I don't use stars or shoot well-known events, which is why I've given up on the system. That word almost came out of his mouth on fire. He took a deep breath. So I find stories for the neglected mass of non-mainstream viewers. And there's an awful lot of us. I'm totally pull-based from word of mouth online. That's my constituency. You make a living from this courtier approach? Kyle paused for longer than he wished. Not yet. I was ripped off on the music films and Coven, so I made Blood Frenzy a non-product. I gave it away free from my website. Some indie record labels embedded ads on the page which covered some of my costs. I'm in a I'm in arrears on the rest, but it's never been about money. He wondered whether he should just get up and leave. He couldn't he couldn't even pretend he liked the man, and he'd be one of the dozen directors Max was currently feeling out for something tabloid. At least it wasn't over lunch he was paying for. This was an actual production office, but he could already intuit he and Max were terminally different. If he couldn't trust his instincts after all he'd been through, then what else did he have to go on? Time to split. But then Max had to go and say, I believe I have such a story. An extraordinary story. So, cards on the table, Kyle. I want you to make a film for me. He fought hard to contain an eruption of excitement. A silence thickened about them. About the half smile withdrew entirely from Max's smooth face. Let me bring you up to speed, and then you can tell me if this is your taste. If this is to your taste. Max leaned back on the in the leather in the leather blah, 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 blah. Max leaned back in the leather chair that dwarfed him. On July 10th, 1975, the Phoenix Police Department removed 15 people from an abandoned mine in the Sonora Desert of Arizona, a few hours after Sister Catherine's Night of Ascent had taken place. The mine had been occupied by the Temple of the Last Days since 1972. 9 of these people were dead, including Sister Catherine. 6 were found alive. Of the living, 5 were children. The infamous Manuel Gomez, aka Brother Belial, was the 6th, Catherine's favorite and her executioner. And Brother Belial was the only adult survivor of that night. I'm sure you've heard of him. He was killed in the recreation room of the Florence Penitentiary before he could stand trial, by inmates unknown. Another 5 members of the cult, all present at the mine during the weeks preceding the night of ascent, were never traced. It is believed they were also murdered, but buried in the desert. It is this aspect of the cult that has fascinated its biographers, its fans, its exploiters. The criminal case. The police believe the murders occurred as a result of infighting and drug psychosis, or some manner of suicide pact. The newspapers at the time called it a satanic ritual involving human sacrifice, including the sacrifice of its leader, who, by the way, was actually beheaded. And that version of events is the one that has endured, as you might say, in the mainstream public imagination. So what else does one need to explore as a filmmaker or biographer? It's a perfectly lurid story that has enough of everything. But Max pushed a pile of DVD cases across the desk to Kyle. An envelope file and an old paperback book so used the writing on the spine was invisible. The 4 documentaries about the cult and the 3 feature films are terrible. What you'd expect. Appalling. Truly awful. Of the many books, only one is worth reading. Last Days by Irvine Levine. Kind of interesting, huh? Dismissed as fictitious and now long out of print, but the police officers from the Yuma and Phoenix police departments suggested that, at the very least, Levine's reportage was fastidious with the details concerning the night of ascent when the murders took place. Kyle cleared his throat. It all happened a long time ago. Unless any new evidence has come to light, why make another film? Are you saying it just needs to be done right? Is there some anniversary? Or nostalgia thing? Max held a small hand up and cut him off. No. There is a story here that has never been told. Forget the murders. Forget the police investigation. The media exploitation. It is an oft-trampled path. But something else about the Temple of the Last Days has also endured. In folklore and in alternative histories of 14 nature. Which is where we come in. You see, there is a very real belief that the group's mystical and occult interests bore dividends. A belief that Sister Catherine achieved something extraordinary. and that her willing death, because, make no mistake, she was slaughtered on her own orders, as were her most loyal followers that night, is part of this mystery. The unexplained phenomenon that haunts their story from its very origins in London. Keeps it alive, you could say, keeps it alive, you could say, for those of us with more open minds. A story no mainstream filmmaker would do anything but attempt to disprove. That is, if they gave it any credence at all. You see, there are other survivors, Kyle. None, not of that night, but of the organization. People who fled many years before its end, and others who escaped mere months before its dissolution. People who, one could say, have never, not ever, been able to escape what they experienced in the service of Sister Catherine. And what is unique now is that a handful of these survivors are breaking silence for the first time since the police investigation in 1975. And when that happens, as you probably know, it's because they have something to say, something they need to say, but have been afraid to say. And so they have provided us with an exceptional opportunity for a groundbreaking work. The effect Sister Catherine had on her followers was nothing short of monumental, life changing, and terrible. Her cruelty was exceptional, but then so was her leap of imagination into the inexplicable. She did something to spellbind them. Max sipped at his glass of Evian. It's taken a great deal of persuasion even to assemble what is now a dwindling group of survivors. He smiled and raised his hands. You could say there is no one else available. I even tracked down the notorious Martha Lake and Bridget Clover. He watched Kyle's face for recognition. When he received none, he seemed disappointed. The two chief witnesses for the prosecution had it ever gone to trial. They became celebrities once the story broke in 75. Two young women who fled the mine in Arizona with their infants 3 months before the night of ascent. Alas, poor Bridget passed over earlier this year. But Martha, dear, dear Martha, is waiting to tell us her part of an incredible story. Kyle looked about the walls of the room, lit like a clinician's laboratory or photographer's studio. He saw framed book covers about glycemic index diets and old posters advertising best-selling spiritual awakenings available on VHS. Bit off the beaten track for you, isn't it? Not very wholesome. Max beamed. Now this is where I do believe this project will really appeal to you. Revelation Productions have developed a side project, Mysteries, a new imprint for the online delivery of content about from a paywall, twinned with DVD releases. We're embracing the revolution here, Kyle. We want an avant-garde element in our portfolio. The brand new will be a base. Sorry, the new brand will be a base for cutting-edge counterculture filmmaking about alternative history and unsolved mysteries, and the Temple story will be the flagship film. You see, the Temple has a very large online following, and one hardly catered for in the manner I propose. Using digital technology, our costs are hardly prohibitive, as you have already alluded to. And once the production cost has been recouped, the profits will be shared on a cooperative basis with the artists. Max sat back in his chair and smiled, raised his hands. Kyle, I can't tell you how good it feels to roll one's sleeves up again. And to get back into the mix, as they say, he smiled at his walls. Do you think I started this company to rest on my laurels? Tesco sells vegan meals and Boots sells aromatic oils. He shook his head in despair. But I was part of alternative approaches to health and spiritual well being when it was original. A lifestyle revolution, Kyle. I was there, back then, the 60s, and I want to get back in touch with my creative side. Kyle bit down on what wanted to come out screaming. And and you want me to make the first film? Precisely, Max tapped a manicured finger on the file between them on the desktop. He now seemed unable to disguise an urgency in his offer. And I want you to start right away. There's no time to lose. The trail I have followed so fastidiously could go cold. All you need to know about the people you will be interviewing is in here. Their names, biographies, their connection to the temple are enclosed, as are photographs and details of the locations that must be visited. Kyle sat mute, stunned into disbelief, his head a chaos of excitement, fear, and caution. What had just happened never happened. What had just been offered was never offered. Ever. Max's stiff face managed to loosen with excitement. My role will be executive producer. All creative decisions are yours. I will not be on set ever. You must be self-sufficient, though I suspect you prefer such an approach. If there is anything you need in the course of the production, you merely call me and I will do my best to execute your requests. Distribution and licensing are already taken care of. My own company is the investor. We take it directly to market. The production money is in place and waiting for you. Kyle picked up the folder. I need to take this away. Look at it. The first day of the principal photography is this Saturday. Kyle laughed and failed to cull the derisory edge to his voice. Come again? Did Max know anything about filmmaking? Did you say Saturday? The schedule is done. Permission to film at each location has been arranged. Accommodation and flights can be booked today. As your employer, my liability insurance will cover you and your equipment. Script? I don't know anything or much about this, Mr. Solomon. I need a script. I need to work out how to tell the story. It's all about the storytelling, Mr. Solomon. You have 5 days to familiarize yourself with the story. Max prodded the Levain book for emphasis. The shooting schedule I have taken the liberty of producing in the chronology of the cult's movements. London, France, Arizona. That will have to be your log line. In essence, it follows their founding to their self-destruction. 6 locations in 3 countries in 11 days. Not one more. No reshoots. No pickups. I want the footage shot within that time frame. Screen lifts for the B-roll and stock footage have been sourced and copies are in that file. Max beamed. What do you say? Disorientation came down fast. Either his seat or the actual room moved. Too many questions, instincts, and suspicions would not settle inside him or evolve into coherence into language. The locations, I need to at least see them first. I need to think about sound, lighting. There won't be any crowds at any of the locations. They're remote, derelict properties. One of your specialties. Besides that, there are some home visits. There may be the odd flight path I don't know about, but nothing too challenging for a man of your experience and adaptability. This is extreme guerrilla filmmaking. Your raison d'etre, my dear boy. A shot list for each location, he was thinking out loud. Vital. You can't plan enough, Mr. Solomon, or you're racing against the clock to correct mistakes you never envisaged. My films are pretty simple. 1, 2 cameras, but still, I have to think every scene through. As he was talking, he thought about his debts. He should ask about the fee. Was there one? Had Max mentioned money? The photographs will have to suffice. Sorry, the photographs will have to suffice. There cannot be any more delays. It's why I am offering you the work. You're too far along now. It can only be done on this schedule by someone, a director of your capability in such a situation. That going to be that going to be a real that going sorry ugh, that going to be a real deal breaker. Sorry, that going to be is that going to be a deal breaker? But the people I'm interviewing, I have no sense of them. I need to talk to them first. No time. The first day of principal photography is this Saturday. I'm afraid I have been let down at the last minute by my team. For personal reasons, they were unable to begin. Team? Who? And anyway, I'm familiar with each of the individuals who have agreed to be filmed, so you'll have to trust my selections. I don't think any of them will disappoint. We wouldn't even be talking now if I wasn't confident in your improvis, improvisation skills. Your ability to deliver on time and on budget. I know you've made films out of fresh air. Through a network of favors and deferred payments, the heavy lifting has been done here, and I have included questions I would like asked. Now this is where I might have a big problem with an agenda. Max stood up to close the meeting. He was impatient, fidgety. It's hardly prescriptive, more of a guide, and you will see my only agenda is a desire to explore the paranormal aspects of the organization, the very purpose of the film. So I guess if I have an agenda, then it should be yours too. How you shoot the scenes is up to you. Frame and compose them any way you like. I want your signature style, and I'll need the dailies delivered promptly. How would that occur? I used a parallel editing strategy on the last two films. Worked just fine. I rough cut the best footage on Final Cut Pro prior to a final edit with my editor. Finger Moose. Good, good. All the master films go to hard disk space I rent from him. Compression means, let's see here. All the master files go to hard disk space I rent from him. Compression means it'll take longer than real time to put across the end of each day, but I can get rushes in a day or two. Let's try for a day. And your production crew? My partner Dan can't work without him, and he does the cameras. So there'll be three of you in total. Dan and this mouse? That's how I did the last two films. As Max came around the desk, hand outstretched, Kyle couldn't tell the executive producer was impressed by their minimalism or pleased at the low cost implications. And they will agree to a confidentiality clause. I'm afraid this project must remain undercover until completion. The story remains contentious. Can't see why not. Why not? Festivals? Theatrical release? It would be nice to try at least. Of course, of course. DVD, internet, and TV is our target, though. But we shall leave no opportunity unexplored. Kyle stood up, but wobbled. He was light in the head, had helium in his feet. You're ceding creative control to me? Absolutely. I need to see a contract. I have it here. You look unconvinced. I have been ill used, Mr. Solomon. Ill used. Investors have one thing on their minds: profit at any cost. Indeed, I hope our collaboration will be profitable. The advance, I think, is generous. Advance? The shadow of his debt seemed to waver, even retract. Debt changed gravity, and had made the world around him heavier for so long. He felt like he was on another planet in the solar system. Just being within reach of a solution to his burden gave him a moment of unbearable bliss. Yes, one third now, one on the one on the shoot's completion, one on final delivery of your masterpiece. You have split it with your comrades is how you split it with your comrades is entirely up to you. I believe it commensurate I believe it commensurate with your reputation. I am thinking £100,000, not including expenses, deductible from net receipts. 100 grand. Kyle swallowed, felt faint. Take this away and look at it. Show it to your agent. If you have one, if you have one. And as you have your own equipment and people, Revelation will merely be the publisher contractor for the finished article. I want to see your cash flow projection. Of course. Anything else? Kyle paused for one beat more than he wished to. He couldn't decide whether Solomon was the devil or his savior. Max beamed. His teeth were perfect. Excellent. Then we have an agreement. Kyle cleared his throat of its constriction, its aridity. He picked up the contract. I'll read this first. I need to know today. Max looked at his Patek Philippe watch. Let's say by 5 p.m. Whew, and that's the end of chapter 1. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm going through just running through the chapters to see what they have. And they have dates and time. I'm very curious to see how this story plays out. I want to read more tonight if I'm able to. I think I'd be pressing against time. But like I said before, we are in the middle of a move. So we are packing boxes. We are doing everything humanly possible to get this done. Yeah, we move in December, and I want to make sure that I still have at least some time for reading. But once we move in, I'll try to push for more time to record. But in the meantime, I'll just record as much as I can and then just enjoy more packing and spending time with family before moving. So, anywho, I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. Like I said, I want to read more, but I don't want to drop. I don't want to. I do not want to just let it go as it was, because I'm curious to see what's going to happen. It has me hooked right now. I'm very curious to see how it goes. But yeah, if you guys like the reading of this, and you want to hear more of it, and you want to see more of it, please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon for more to get updated on videos that come out, as well as new content. We are going to be having a top 10 list for the first 10 the first 10 DreamWorks animated films. So that will be an interesting list, and I'm hoping you guys are excited about that. But yeah, tonight, every Wednesday, I'm hoping to continue more of this story, and I hope you all are liking this. Are liking this this book. But yeah, if you want to make a comment, please comment down below. And yeah, that's it. I hope you all have a wonderful, fantastic evening, and we'll see you all in the next video. Until then, I am the Epileptic Explorer, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.